When a narcissist finally understands that you are not the fragile, uneducated person they assumed you were, it changes everything. I want us to pause and really think about those two specific concepts for a second before we move forward into the rest of our discussion. Weak and foolish are not terms that most manipulative people would ever say out loud. They do not use those words in their everyday speech when they are trying to maintain the public image of being a perfectly balanced, rational individual who just happens to hold much higher standards than everyone else around them. However, if you look beneath the surface of the words they actually choose to use, a different picture emerges. When they offer those quiet corrections, or when they gently imply that you are just being overly emotional, misinterpreting the situation, or simply lacking the mental capacity to comprehend the true depth of what is happening, they are sending a clear message. Underneath all of that sophisticated behavior and easily deniable condescension, there is a core operational belief that treats you exactly as if you were those two insulting words. The reality is that the narcissist selected you to be in their life partly because something about your demeanor made you look easy to handle. They saw someone whose view of the world could be reshaped over time, someone whose truth could be altered by their influence, and someone whose actions could be completely forecast. This allowed them to operate within the relationship the same way an experienced craftsman handles predictable, familiar materials. They did not necessarily pick you because you came across as completely defenseless or obviously uneducated. In fact, in a great number of situations, the exact opposite happens to be true. The manipulative person is frequently drawn straight toward your visible resilience and capability. They seek you out because defeating a person of substance provides a far more significant boost to their ego and a much larger amount of psychological validation than taking over someone who was already ready to give up from the start. Even so, something in the way you two first interacted gave them the impression that you were flexible in the precise way they required. To a narcissist, being flexible is the closest concept they have to what they truly mean, which is being completely manageable. If you strip away the polite phrasing, it always comes back to those original, harsher assumptions. The exact second they discover they made a massive mistake in their calculations is a critical turning point. It is the instant where their belief that you can be controlled runs directly into the solid reality of who you truly are, what you are capable of noticing, and the incredible mental clarity you develop just to survive everything the relationship put you through. That specific moment of discovery is what we are going to focus on today. It represents one of the most psychologically powerful and meaningful events that can happen in the entire timeline of a relationship with a narcissist. I encourage you to stay focused and follow along closely with me, because what takes place during this realization, how the manipulator processes what they have just uncovered about you, and how it completely transforms every future interaction between the two of you, is something that most survivors have never heard explained with the deep precision it truly deserves. Let us begin by breaking down what the manipulator based their original opinion of you on in the first place. Gaining a clear understanding of that initial calculation is precisely what makes the eventual collapse of their plan so deeply felt and full of consequences. When a narcissist first evaluates a potential partner or target, it is not a simple one-time judgment made in a single afternoon. Instead, it is a continuous, mostly unconscious habit of recognizing behavioral patterns that runs constantly through the beginning stages of any meaningful relationship. During this phase, they are quietly collecting data about how you function. They want to know what makes you react, what moves your emotions, where your specific personal vulnerabilities lie, and exactly how those soft spots can be triggered most effectively to serve their goals. You have to realize that this collection process is not planned out in a way that suggests a person sitting down at a desk intentionally writing out a psychological profile. It happens much more naturally than that. It is an instinctive, automatic response built from decades of practice spent scanning human beings for the specific types of information a narcissist needs to survive. They are not looking for the kind of information that creates an authentic human bond. They are completely uninterested in developing a deep, mutual understanding of your inner thoughts, dreams, and feelings. They are only looking for operational data. They want to know what drives this person forward. They want to discover what makes this person feel unsafe or threatened. They need to find out what this person desires so badly that they will willingly ignore red flags and excuse bad behaviors they would normally never tolerate. They look at your personal history to see what experiences you are bringing into the relationship so they can mirror them, pretend to deeply relate to them during the initial stage of intense affection, and eventually weaponize those exact memories against you later on. The narcissist who entered your life ran this exact system on you. They gathered all this personal data and reached a conclusion that gave them enough confidence to move forward with their plans. Somewhere inside that initial theory was the firm operational belief that you were predictable enough to control in the specific ways that matter to how they run a relationship. What they completely failed to see is the exact thing they always overlook when dealing with the unique individuals who cause this ultimate moment of realization. They missed the core part of your personality that was not out in the open on the surface. You were not hiding this part of yourself as a clever strategy, nor were you putting up a fake personality to trick them. The simple truth is that the part of the narcissist that scans other people for functional data simply does not possess the internal sensors required to detect higher qualities of character. The perceptive radar of a manipulative person is incredibly well trained when it comes to spotting wounds, desires, and fears. They are experts at finding out what someone needs so they can use it to their advantage. However, their system is completely broken and underdeveloped when it comes to recognizing a deep inner strength that cannot be turned into a weakness. They have no way to read the quiet power of a person who possesses immense awareness, but feels no need to brag about it or show it off to the world. They cannot comprehend the kind of clarity that grows within a person, not because they became bitter and cynical after being naive, but because they process their real-world struggles with total honesty and self-reflection. They do not understand the type of patience that is completely separate from being passive. Real patience is the steady, unshakable calm of an individual who has learned through experience that understanding a situation completely before taking action is infinitely more powerful than throwing a quick emotional tantrum. All of these incredible traits were alive inside you from the very first day you met, but absolutely none of it was captured by the narcissist during their initial evaluation. Their system was never searching for those qualities. It was only hunting for the things it required to feel safe enough to proceed. And as a result, it only found what it wanted to see. It noticed your very real human vulnerabilities, the genuine emotional needs that their intense affection could target with seemingly perfect timing, and the true stories from your past that they could meet with highly convincing fake empathy early on. They constructed their entire mental map of you based strictly on those surface-level discoveries, and they completely missed everything else that mattered. They missed the immense depth that existed right beneath your vulnerability. They failed to see the incredible clarity that was quietly growing under the surface of the confusion caused by their initial behavior. Most importantly, they did not notice the specific kind of deep attention you were paying to the relationship, which was quietly recording and analyzing far more details than their manipulative behavior was ever designed to hide. This brings us to the ultimate twist of this entire experience. The initial map the narcissist created was not completely made up. The soft spots they found in your character were completely real. The emotional desires they played into were genuine. And the personal history they pretended to understand was accurately observed on a basic level. Their evaluation failed miserably not because they were reading the wrong individual, but because they were only capable of reading a tiny fraction of the person standing in front of them. They only saw the parts that could be processed by their narrow scanning system, while the far more significant part of you remained totally invisible to them. That hidden part of your character is the exact force that determines who actually triumphs, who loses, and who walks away with their dignity intact over the long arc of this psychological game. The moment of realization happens when both of these sides of your personality suddenly become visible to the narcissist at the exact same time. They are forced to look at the side they thought they mapped out alongside the powerful side they completely missed. They see the person they genuinely believed they were controlling, and right behind that image, they discover the true individual who has been standing there the whole time, quietly watching the manipulation take place with a level of focus and detail that the narcissist never expected. The manipulator looks at you and realizes for the first time in the relationship that there are actually two people standing before them instead of the single, simple target they thought they had trapped. They see the map they drew, and then they see the real person standing behind it who knows things about the dynamic and about the narcissist themselves that the narcissist had absolutely no idea were being noticed. It is incredibly valuable to understand what actually causes this sudden realization to happen, because it rarely takes place as a single dramatic showdown or a theatrical confrontation. Instead, it builds up slowly over time through a collection of small, everyday instances where their expected results fail to appear. It happens during ordinary conversations when their usual manipulations suddenly land completely differently than they were always supposed to land, leaving them confused by a response they could never have anticipated. This transformation occurs when something in your behavior, your composure, or the exact nature of your reaction to an event that should have caused a predictable response creates something completely unexpected. Your reaction yields an outcome that the narcissist map did not foresee and cannot immediately explain. The first few times this takes place, the narcissist internal psychology immediately creates a convenient explanation that keeps their original map intact. They convince themselves that you are simply having a bad day or that their current approach just needs a minor adjustment. They tell themselves that the tool they are using needs to be recalibrated rather than thrown away completely. In their mind, the map itself is never wrong. The map is simply being applied incorrectly in that specific instance. As a result, they adjust their approach and they recalibrate their tools. However, the newly adjusted approach runs into the exact same quality of response that the original approach faced. The newly recalibrated tool lands in the precise way that the original tool landed. Once again, they consult their internal map, and the map still offers no reasonable explanation for the consistent space between what they predicted would happen and what they are actually receiving from you. It is during this repeated checking of a map that completely fails to explain the real territory that the realization begins to take root. This does not happen as a conscious thought, nor does it appear as a clear acknowledgement that their initial evaluation was totally wrong. An explicit admission of being incorrect is not something the fragile psychology of a narcissist can handle gracefully. Instead, it shows up as a distinct shift in the quality of the attention they direct toward you. You will notice a slight adjustment in how carefully they watch you, or a new level of alertness in their interactions with you that was never present in the past. This is no longer the easy, arrogant confidence of a person who knows every inch of their terrain. It is replaced by something much more cautious, more monitoring, and more specifically focused on collecting the exact data that their original assessment failed to gather. The narcissist has begun to feel that there is an element inside you that their map missed entirely. Sensing this presence without being able to identify it clearly marks the beginning of the specific discomfort we are analyzing today. We are going to explore exactly what this internal discomfort produces in their behavior toward you, the specific ways it alters every single interaction between you, what the fully realized version of this moment looks like, and what it means for everything that comes next. The behavior that this discomfort creates in the narcissist is something that most people on the receiving end have experienced firsthand, yet they rarely possess the proper framework to truly understand what they are witnessing. This happens because the behavioral shift following the start of this realization does not look like what you would normally expect. If an individual who had been managing your life suddenly discovered that their control was not nearly as complete as they believed, you might expect them to retreat. You might think they would pull back and conduct a recalibration from a safe distance while they process this new information. Alternatively, you might expect an escalation of their existing tactics, a doubling down on the things that always worked before, hoping that increasing the intensity will produce the reaction that normal intensity failed to get. While both of these reactions do take place at various stages of this realization, the very first and most distinctive behavioral shift is something much more specific and psychologically revealing. In certain very specific interactions, the narcissist becomes almost imperceptibly more careful around you. They are not necessarily kinder or warmer, and this is certainly not a return to the intense affection that defined the early days of the relationship. They become careful in the specific sense of an individual who suddenly realizes that what they are saying is being heard much more completely than they ever intended it to be. They feel, without being able to fully express it, that the person standing in front of them is receiving not just the basic content of the conversation, but the actual architecture of it. They sense that you see the hidden structure underneath the words, the true intention behind the phrasing, and the massive gap between what is being spoken and what is actually meant. The sudden awareness that you are listening on this level creates a profound sense of self-consciousness within the narcissist. This is an experience genuinely foreign to a personality whose primary mode of operation relies on the confident deployment of tools that have always worked in the past. They continue to use their tools, but those tools are now being deployed by someone who is, for the very first time, not entirely confident in what they are doing. This self-consciousness is incredibly meaningful beyond how it appears on the surface, because self-consciousness in a narcissist is not just a temporary emotional mood. It represents a major structural breakdown of their entire system. The tactics of a narcissist only work because they are thrown out from a position of absolute certainty in their effectiveness. The confidence cannot be separated from the tactic itself. It is a core part of the weapon, and it creates a specific feeling of certainty in the victim that makes the manipulation believable. When you are unsure if something bad is happening to you, and when a situation is ambiguous enough that your own memory and perception feel shaky, part of what generates that doubt is the absolute, unshakable conviction of the person manipulating you. If you remove that conviction, the tool immediately loses a massive amount of its power. A manipulation that arrives with a layer of self-consciousness behind it is simply not the same manipulation that arrived with total confidence. It possesses a slightly different texture, a different quality of energy in its delivery, and a tiny hesitation that the awakening person on the receiving end notices before they can even put it into words. Gaslighting that comes from a narcissist, who is no longer entirely certain that the lie will work, feels completely different than gaslighting that comes from a narcissist who had absolutely no doubt about its power. You, having developed the precise clarity that caused this realization in the first place, immediately register this difference. You feel the split-second hesitation. You notice the underlying self-consciousness. Noticing these shifts confirms something you have been feeling for a long time, but could not quite form into absolute knowledge. It tells you that the dynamic has officially shifted, that the balance of information between the two of you has changed, that you know far more about what is happening than you are ever supposed to know, and that the narcissist has begun to sense your awareness. This brings us to a highly important point, which is understanding the specific ways the narcissist responds to the full realization once it completely sets in. This is the moment when their vague feeling turns into absolute certainty, when the failure of their map becomes undeniable, and when they look at you and understand with total clarity that the individual they thought they were dealing with does not exist. This realization does not cause a single isolated reaction. Instead, it triggers a predictable sequence of behaviors. Understanding this sequence helps you navigate the situation safely without being knocked off balance by any single stage. The very first response in this sequence is testing. This involves a rapid, often incredibly subtle series of interactions designed specifically to confirm or deny what the narcissist suspects about the depth of your clarity. They will purposefully say something that requires a specific type of response from an individual who is still trapped within the fake reality they built for you. They will share a statement that only makes sense as a normal remark if you are still completely accepting their version of past events, their framing of the relationship, their skewed account of who is responsible for the problems, and their reasons for why things are the way they are. They watch your face and listen to your tone very closely to see if you will answer from within their constructed reality, or if you will speak from a place entirely outside of it. When you respond from outside their illusion, and when the answer you give is the response of a person who sees the situation with total clarity rather than someone whose mind they have successfully shaped, the ultimate confirmation arrives. They finally realize that you are absolutely not the person they thought you were. The realization is now fully complete, and the behavioral sequence moves directly into its second stage. This second stage is the one that most people find the most confusing and destabilizing. It is deeply counterintuitive because it closely resembles the early days of the relationship, which makes it incredibly difficult to navigate if you do not understand what is actually happening behind the scenes. During this second stage, you will notice a sudden major increase in their charm, attention, and apparent investment in the connection. It is not quite the full force of the initial love bombing phase, but it shares the exact same quality. You will experience a sudden warmth and what looks like a genuine interest in your life. You will have conversations that feel far more real than anything you have experienced in recent memory, along with moments of vulnerability that seem completely authentic compared to the fake vulnerability they usually put on display. This sudden surge in positive behavior is not what it appears to be, and it is definitely not what most people desperately hope it represents. It is not proof that the relationship can finally become what you always hoped it would be, nor is it evidence that the loving person from the very beginning is still available underneath it all. It is certainly not confirmation that what felt real in the past was genuine and can be brought back if you just create the right conditions. In reality, this behavior is a deliberate, strategic recalculation. The narcissist has officially confirmed that you are seeing things much more clearly than their original map predicted, so they are now desperately trying to recreate the exact environment where your sight was foggy. They want to reintroduce just enough warmth, apparent honesty, and emotional connection to soften the sharp clarity you have been developing over time. Their goal is not to genuinely reconnect with you, but to blur your vision and bring back the old confusion, making the territory unstable enough for their old map to work again. This tactic works surprisingly often, which would be discouraging if it were not so completely understandable. The sudden warmth targets a very real part of your humanity, the persistent hope that is not foolish at all, but simply the natural response of a person who loves something real in the beginning and has not fully stopped caring. The narcissist knows this hope is still alive inside you. Their recent realization told them exactly where it was hiding, and the second stage is aimed directly at that emotional soft spot. The third stage arrives when the second stage fails to produce the results they want. When their calculated warmth fails to bring back the confusion because your clarity has grown far too strong to be blurred by simple affection, they switch gears. This third stage is incredibly important for understanding what this realization actually costs the manipulator, what it reveals about the deep flaws in their mental structure, and what it means for the long-term future of any interaction between you. The third stage is pure anger. This is not the controlled, easily denied anger you saw earlier in the relationship. It is not the sharp comment, the subtle punishment, or the quiet withdrawal of affection that was perfectly calibrated to keep them looking reasonable. This new anger is completely unhinged. It carries a sense of genuine frustration that is entirely different from the fake theatrical frustration they normally use to get their way. What is being blocked here is not just a personal preference, a high standard, or an expectation of how you should behave. What is being shattered is the core operational belief that has guided their actions through the entire relationship. The absolute assumption that you could be managed. When a fundamental assumption is crushed inside a psychology completely organized around maintaining control, it does not produce a useful, targeted anger. Instead, it creates total emotional dysregulation. If you are paying the exact kind of deep attention you have developed through the struggles of this relationship, what you see in that gap will not scare you. It will actually bring you immense clarity. The anger that shows up when a narcissist realizes you are not who they thought you were is not the rage of a powerful warrior meeting a worthy opponent. It is the panic of an individual whose entire sense of control was built on an inaccurate map and who is now facing the harsh consequences of that mistake in a situation where they cannot just redraw the map and carry on as usual. It is the bitter anger of someone who discovered much too late that the person they were trying to manage was never actually manageable. They are realizing that you were always observing, always learning, and always growing into the clarity that created this exact moment. For the person who can look at this rage objectively, it does not feel like a threat. It serves as an absolute confirmation that every single suspicion you had about the relationship was completely correct. It proves that the clarity you developed is real and entirely worth trusting. It proves that the map the narcissist drew of your character was completely wrong in the most important way possible. The person standing strong in front of their anger right now is unmanageable, clear-eyed, and no longer willing to pretend that the old map was accurate. That powerful person is absolutely not the submissive target the narcissist thought they chose in the beginning, and the narcissist is finally starting to feel the weight of what that means in the full heat of this realization. They do not understand it completely, and they certainly lack the self-awareness required to make this realization productive or healing, but they know enough to realize that what they plan to do to you is no longer possible. That sudden realization landing heavily inside a mind that was never designed to accept defeat is the most honest and real thing this entire experience produces for both of you.